A disrespectful bully thought he could mock the sentinel at the tomb of the unknown soldier. He tried to grab the guard's rifle, but a single, deafening gunshot instantly taught him the meaning of respect. The air over Arlington National Cemetery was thick and heavy, a typical Washington, D.C. summer afternoon where the humidity felt like a weighted blanket. Silence was the currency here, traded in hushed tones and reverent footsteps. Before the pristine white marble of the tomb of the unknown soldier, that silence was absolute, broken only by a sound as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, the rhythmic click of heels on stone. Click. 21 seconds of perfect stillness. Click. The turn, executed with the flawless geometry of a lifelong calling. Click. 21 steps down the black mat, each one a heartbeat for the nation's honored dead. This was the world of Sergeant Elias Vance. At 30 years old, his face was a stoic mask, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the horizon, a gaze honed in the mountains of Afghanistan. His Army service uniform was immaculate, the deep blue jacket a stark contrast to the blinding white of the plaza. Polished brass buttons gleamed, and the M14 rifle resting on his shoulder was more than a weapon, it was a sacred extension of his duty, its walnut stock glowing with a deep, reverent sheen. He was not just a soldier, he was a sentinel, a living monument to sacrifice. Into this sacred space, a discordant note sounded. His name was Jax, and he moved through the respectful crowd like a wrecking ball. He shoved past a woman trying to frame a photo on her phone, the aggressive thrust of his shoulder unapologetic. A faded, poorly rendered prison tattoo of a snarling wolf crawled up his neck, peeking over the collar of a grimy tank top. He chewed his gum with an open mouth, the loud, obnoxious pop a deliberate act of defiance against the hallowed quiet. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer. Tourists, who had been mesmerized by the Sentinel's patrol, now cast wary glances at the intruder. Jax's steel-toed boots scuffed against the marble with a grating sound, each step an insult to the ground he walked on. His eyes, cold and filled with a bored contempt, scanned the scene. He didn't see the solemnity or the history. He saw a show, a performance. And in Sergeant Vance, he saw the lead actor, a perfect target for his particular brand of disrespect. Vance's external posture remained unchanged. Not a flicker of an eyelash, not a twitch of a muscle. But inside, his combat-honed senses had already catalogued the threat. Male, approximately 6 feet, 220 pounds. Agitated. Aggressive posture. Potential for escalation, high. He wasn't just walking the mat anymore. He was on patrol, and a hostile had just entered his sector. The humid air suddenly felt charged, the silence no longer peaceful, but tense, like the held breath before a storm. Jax slouched against one of the marble railings, his sneer a slash of ugliness in the serene environment. He let out a low, mocking whistle as Vance completed another turn. "Well, look at this," Jax's voice was a gravelly rasp, loud enough to make several onlookers flinch. G.I. Joe in his fancy dress-up clothes. "You feel like a big man, pal." Vance's gaze remained locked forward. His mind, however, was a fortress of discipline. He could hear the voice of his platoon sergeant from his first day in the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard. "You are not here for you, Vance. You are not here for the crowd. You are a ghost. Your entire existence on that mat is for the men in that tomb. You will never disgrace them." Jax, getting no reaction, grew bolder. He pushed himself off the railing and ambled closer to the edge of the black mat, a sacred line no tourist ever dared to cross. "Seriously, how much of my tax money goes to pay you to walk back and forth all day? We got real problems in this country, and we're paying for this." He gestured vaguely at Vance, the tomb, the entire solemn ritual. Near the edge of the plaza stood 2 older men. Their posture was straight, their faces etched with a quiet dignity. One wore a faded, Vietnam veteran, cap. He leaned down to his young grandson. "See, buddy," the veteran whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "he walks 21 steps. That's for the 21-gun salute, the highest honor a soldier can get. He does it every minute of every day, no matter what. It's about respect. Jax overheard the quiet explanation and a cruel smile spread across his face. He turned his attention to the old veteran. Respect? You call this respect? It's a joke. He then looked back at Vance, his voice dripping with venom. Hey, toy soldier. This old-timer thinks you're something special. What do you think? You allowed to have thoughts in that empty head, or do they program you just to walk and look pretty? The air crackled. The crowd was visibly uncomfortable now, their murmurs dying down into a horrified silence. Vance's jaw was a granite slab. The insults to himself were nothing. He'd endured worse in basic training. But the disrespect aimed at the veteran, at the tomb, at the very concept of honor he embodied, that was different. That was a desecration. His gloved hand, resting on the stock of his M14, felt the familiar grain of the wood. It was a grounding sensation, a reminder of the weight of his duty. He continued his patrol, each step a silent act of defiance, a testament to a discipline Jax could never comprehend. The lack of reaction was like fuel on a fire for Jax's ego. He needed to provoke, to shatter the unbreakable composure that was, in itself, an indictment of his own chaotic life. He took a step over the chains, planting his scuffed boots on the sacred plaza. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. What's the matter, hero? Jax taunted, circling Vance like a hyena. Cat got your tongue. He was close now, so close that Vance could smell the sour stench of stale cigarettes and sweat clinging to him, a foul miasma in the clean, reverent air. Jax's eyes fell to the row of ribbons and medals on Vance's chest. They told the story of his service, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, the Army Commendation Medal, and at the top, the deep, somber purple and gold of the Purple Heart. Jax's grimy hand shot out. His finger, yellowed from nicotine, flicked the Purple Heart. Flick. The small, disrespectful sound was as loud as a cannon shot in the stillness. Nice little trinket, Jax sneered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What did you get this for? Tripping down some stairs? Or maybe you got a boo-boo playing paintball? That was the line. It wasn't just an insult to Vance, it was an insult to every soldier who had ever bled for the flag, to the very sacrifice the tomb represented. Vance's entire being went cold and still. It was the stillness of a predator, the absolute calm before a strike. The two veterans saw it. They recognized the subtle shift in his posture, the almost imperceptible tightening of the muscles around his eyes. This was no longer ceremony. This whole uniform feels cheap, Jax continued, emboldened by his own audacity. He grabbed the lapel of Vance's perfectly pressed jacket, crumpling the material. All for show. Bet this rifle is just a plastic prop, too. His hand slid from the lapel, down the soldier's arm, and moved with deliberate slowness toward the M14. Vance's mind was a flurry of calculations, running through the protocols he had drilled 1,000 times. Rule of Engagement, Section 4, Physical Contact with the Sentinel or his equipment. Threat Level, Severe. Authorized Response, Non-lethal force to re-establish control of the scene. As Jax's fingers brushed against the cool steel of the rifle's barrel, Vance's body, acting on years of muscle memory and training, finally responded. The crowd, watching in horrified fascination, had no idea they were about to witness the precise moment where ceremony ended and combat readiness began. Let's see if this thing is even real, Jax whispered, his fingers starting to wrap around the barrel of the M14. He tensed his muscles, preparing to wrench the rifle away and hold it up like a trophy. He never got the chance. In a movement that was a blur of polished walnut and dark blue wool, Vance exploded into action. It wasn't a clumsy brawl, it was a demonstration of lethal efficiency. He pivoted on his heel, not away from Jax, but into him. The M14, far from being a prop, became a seamless extension of his will. With a swift, brutal, and controlled arc, he swung the rifle's heavy buttstock upward. There was a sharp, percussive crack as the dense wood connected squarely with Jax's solar plexus. It wasn't the dull thud of a punch, it was the sound of solid force meeting soft tissue, a sound that spoke of broken air and shattered confidence. All the air rushed out of Jax's lungs in a strangled gasp. His eyes, which moments before had been filled with arrogant mockery, were now wide with pure shock and agony. The sneer on his face vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. He staggered backward, his boots scraping clumsily on the marble as he clutched his midsection, his body folding in on itself like a cheap suit. He tried to speak, to curse, to reclaim his dominance, but only a pained wheeze escaped his lips. He had made a critical, life-altering miscalculation. He had poked a bear, assuming it was a statue. The pain was secondary to the humiliation. The crowd, the veterans, the kid with his grandfather, they had all seen him, the tough guy, get dropped with a single, effortless move. Vance had already pivoted back into his ceremonial stance, the M14 resting perfectly on his shoulder as if it had never moved. His face was still a mask of impassive discipline, but his eyes, fixed on that distant point, now held a cold, hard fire. He had issued his first and only warning. Jax, however, was not a man who learned from warnings. He was fueled by rage and wounded pride. He straightened up slowly, his face flushing a dangerous, mottled red. The pain in his gut was nothing compared to the fury in his heart. "You think you're tough," he rasped, his voice hoarse. That was a lucky shot. A cheap shot. He balled his hands into fists, the wolf tattoo on his neck seeming to snarl. "Now you're gonna see a real fight." He lowered his stance, preparing to charge, completely oblivious to the fact that he hadn't just been in a fight. He had just failed a test, and the final exam was about to begin. He launched himself forward with the raw, undisciplined fury of a cornered animal. His only thought was to tackle the guard, to bring him down to his level, to wipe the infuriating calm from his face through sheer brutality. But he was moving against a man who operated on a different plane of existence. Before Jax's second foot had even left the ground, Sergeant Vance moved again. This time, the motion was even more fluid, more economical, more terrifyingly professional. The M14 came off his shoulder, was brought to a ready position, and a single round was chambered in a motion so practiced it was almost invisible. Vance didn't aim at Jax. He aimed at the sky. The gunshot was not a pop. It was a deafening, soul-shaking boom that ripped through the humid summer air. It slammed into the marble plaza and echoed off the stone amphitheater, a sound of pure, unadulterated authority. It was the sound of war, of finality, of a line that had been irrevocably crossed. The smell of cordite, sharp and acrid, instantly sliced through the air. Every bird in Arlington took flight. Every tourist dropped to a crouch or dove for cover. And Jax froze. He stopped mid-lunge, his body locked in a grotesque tableau of aggression. His arms were outstretched, his face contorted in a snarl of rage, but his feet were cemented to the ground. The sound had bypassed his conscious thought and hit something ancient and primal in his brain stem. It was the sound that signifies the end of everything. Pure, undiluted fear washed over his face, erasing the anger and replacing it with the blank, terrified stare of a man who suddenly understands he is no longer in control of his own destiny. He realized, in that thunderous moment, that the rifle was real. The soldier was real. And his life was in very real danger. Silence descended again, but this time it was a ringing, electric silence, thick with shock and adrenaline. Then, a voice cut through it. "On your knees." It was Sergeant Vance. His voice was not a shout. It was a command. It was cold, clear, and devoid of all emotion save for absolute, unshakable authority. It was the voice of a man who had given orders in life-or-death situations, a voice that expected and received immediate compliance. Jax's prison yard bravado, his street corner toughness, all of it evaporated like mist in the sun. His knees buckled as if his strings had been cut, and he collapsed onto the hard marble with a clatter of teeth and bone. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, shot up into the air, fingers spread wide in the universal gesture of surrender. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his wide, terrified eyes. The tough guy was gone, and in his place was just a pathetic, frightened man who had picked a fight with a living monument and lost. The wail of approaching sirens was the only sound that dared to break the spell. Within moments, 2 military police officers, clad in their own crisp uniforms, jogged into the plaza, their movements swift and professional. They took in the scene in a single, practiced glance, the sentinel standing at a perfect parade rest, rifle held ready, the suspect kneeling on the ground, hands in the air, trembling, the crowd of stunned onlookers. "Stay down," one of the MPs commanded, though the order was unnecessary. Jax looked as if he might never stand up again. As they cuffed his wrists behind his back, his shoulders slumped in the finality of utter defeat. The lead MP approached Sergeant Vance, his voice a mixture of professional duty and profound respect. "We'll take it from here, Sergeant. We'll need your statement." Before Vance could respond, the Vietnam veteran stepped forward, his grandson holding tightly to his hand. "I saw the whole thing, officer," the old soldier said, his voice steady and clear. "This man verbally abused the sentinel, he physically assaulted him, and he attempted to seize his weapon. The sergeant showed more restraint than I've ever seen. He's a credit to the uniform." His friend nodded in solemn agreement. As the MPs hauled a now limp Jax to his feet and led him away, the crowd began to stir, their whispers filling the air. "I can't believe that just happened," one woman said. "I always thought. I don't know, that it was just for show." Her friend shook her head, her eyes still fixed on Vance. "No. It's not a show." As Jax disappeared from view, the old veteran turned back toward the plaza. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He simply drew himself up to his full height, looked at the unwavering figure of Sergeant Vance, and rendered a slow, crisp salute. It was a gesture that transcended words, soldier to soldier, generation to generation. It was an acknowledgement of a shared code, a silent understanding of duty and sacrifice. Sergeant Vance remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed forward, his duty uninterrupted. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the plaza. The ceremony was the same, but for everyone who had witnessed the day's events, it would never look the same again. They had seen the steel beneath the spit-shined surface. They had learned that the Sentinel's quiet vigil was not a performance, but a promise, guarded by a warrior's heart. What is the true meaning of honor in an age that so often mocks tradition? How far should respect be bent before it must be defended with steel? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, comment with respect for all opinions. If you are moved by this story of unshakable resolve, show your support by hitting that like button, share it with someone who appreciates true dedication, and be sure to subscribe for more incredible stories of honor and duty. We'll see you next time.